I'll call to order this regular meeting of the Board of Finance for Tuesday, March 19th, 2019. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We have a fairly short agenda this evening, so depending on how deep we get into some of the budget discussions tonight, we might be out of here in an expeditious manner. So the agenda says discussion of fiscal year 1920 budget requests. So it's a pretty broad brush to cover any topic that we might want to cover. So I guess I would put it to all of you who has some topics that they've spent some time on that they would like to cover or discuss tonight while Jennifer is sneezing. Right, that's not actually on the agenda, so I'm going to have to declare this out of order, but that's okay.
So I think Jim and I were prepared to talk community environment.
Okay, terrific.
And I don't know if anybody else does.
All right, why don't we turn to community environment?
Yeah, we're all flipped to maybe page 68
Yep.
and repeat after me. Or maybe page 70.
Yep.
Where it talks about full-time staff.
Go ahead.
You know, so basically, in terms of going through the budget, there's been no change in sort of total FTEs, but as you'll see, there's a small decrease in the actual amount of the salary expense. That was related to one individual who was underneath the planning and zoning department that's now switched departments. That was sort of a senior level employee.
Okay.
And it was replaced with somebody, I think, that had lower seniority, which caused about
$3,550.
$3,500 in savings.
Okay.
So same number of employees. I don't recall where the other one transferred, I think internally.
Yeah, yep.
So I think flipping to page 73, you can see that at the top of the full-time, on the full-time salary. I think the other things we'd point out are, if you look on the revenue side, you know, on the top of page 72,
Yep.
you know,
There's 4 large projects that are going to start this year.
So has there been an update on start dates for those projects, and are they reflected in their revenue forecasts?
I think this adjustment reflects that
yeah, so
revenue forecast change.
yeah, we were humming along at like 123, 122 for the last 2 years, and then last year's budget, we pulled out the permits that we thought were related to a certain portion of the big developments that were going to be pushed, that we knew weren't going to happen, I think, during last year. And so that's why we budgeted 65, and now we're sort of back up to 122, which reflects some additional permitting revenue, I think, right from those new projects, because they pay it.
Right, and the bulk of the bulk of the revenue from those projects will be in the building department. Planning and zoning gets a minimal amount of that. I don't know if in your conversations with Jeremy this came up, but I think it was the same night that the Board of Selectmen voted on this, the RTM approved a fee increase.
Yeah.
So their fees can go up based on that fee increase. I think he said 25 to 30,000.
Correct. And
Yeah, that's correct.
And that becomes effective like on March 31st. We'll get a little bit of that in this fiscal year.
Right, and we'll get a full year of it in 1920.
Yeah.
Okay, what else?
And so I think when you think about like what they're doing with those same employees, like those 4 big projects that she mentioned, so and those are fairly sizable. I think when you look at, even if you look at the some of the performance metrics here, when you look at the amount of applications and permits that have been submitted and the amount that they've actually, you know, the applications that have come in and sort of what they've approved, you know, the amount has stayed relatively the same, that they think it's going to go up a little bit, but the projects are obviously a lot larger, and so they encompass a lot more of their time.
How many staff did we add to P&Z last year? Was it just one, Jennifer?
It was a couple years ago that we added
Or 2
one.
years ago?
Was it 2 halves?
No, we added a full-time, I think it was 2 or 2.5 years ago.
And has that helped balance their workload? Has this worked out?
Yes, I think it's worked out very well.
Okay.
We might want to talk about the City View online portal as well. That's on page 240.
Yeah, so if you look
240?
at, like, yeah, I mean, this is like the operating aspect of this budget. They had there's a $22,000 placeholder on page 240, which is basically, was meant to reflect the additional modules so that all of these permits can be filled out and submitted online. Currently, I think they began a month or so ago, I think early February, where you could submit just certain mechanical, I think it was just mechanical permits. They basically tried it with a kind of small test case. Yeah, spoke to Kate. It sounds like they're not as happy with that first module
Okay,
as they thought they were. So before they go too deep and spend another $22,000 on all the rest of the modules, they're checking to see if there's an alternative software that might be easier to use, and the expense may be similar.
okay,
So I think Kate had suggested, she sent us an email today just indicating that they expect in the next couple weeks, likely before we actually have to vote on this, that they'll know what they're doing. Are they delaying it? Are they moving to a new software that either cost less or cost more?
okay. Other topics or anything else that you covered with Kate that is of note?
Not on planning and zoning.
Okay.
Not on that. The other ones, you want to run through, we have beautification as well?
Yeah, we got beautification, which is on page 76.
Okay,
And there's really not much to say here. The fees are primarily, these costs are primarily associated to the hanging baskets and the watering of the baskets in town. I
Okay.
think they actually had requested additional funds, but especially, they did ask for additional capital funding of $20,000, and Kate reduced it to $7,000.
Yeah, I think that was on the capital side.
Oh, that was on, yeah, that was on the
Yeah.
capital side.
I think, yeah, staff came in with, looking for 20,000 to kind of help really clean up some of the stuff around town hall in connection with the other work that they've done out front.
Okay.
Kate brought that down to 7, and then the Board of
And
Selectmen
then the Board of
brought
Selectmen brought it down even further.
it down to 5.
okay. All right, good. Anything else on community service, community environment?
Yes, there's celebrations and community grants, page 77.
Yep.
There were some, most of this is related to the Memorial Day Parade, the Historical Society grant, holiday lights, some repair work around flags, and I think there was a little bit of funding in for some cemetery cleanup. Some of the things to note is fireworks are no longer in this budget. If you recall, that's been moved out. I think that it is, are we even budgeting it now? Because it was gonna
No,
be Park and
'cause
Recs, and we put it in.
It's gonna be a special revenue fund.
Right, so
All
it's
the
in.
donations will go into that
Right.
fund and then just go out. 'Cause the
Right.
fireworks, other than the police aspect of it,
Right, and the police overtime is what we used to pay out of this line, and we took the stance that police overtime, it's for a town event, it should just be accounted for in their overtime line.
So that remains in the police budget, and then the rest is in this
In the
special
special
revenue
revenue
fund, and that'll cover purchase of the fireworks and everything else.
Right,
so we're basically paying for the police protection and so forth, and then the community, there's donations that cover the actual fireworks and
Right.
cleanup.
What happened to the Memorial Day Parade? I know a lot of that was done with volunteers before, and I think it's been shifted to Parks and Rec. Did that
no, I
result in
don't
a
think
budget?
they're doing
They're
the
not doing that?
parade.
That's in this budget,
Is that in this budget? Okay.
yeah. And,
I think that's in the program expenses line is what
right,
Okay.
covers the Memorial Day parade.
I know they've had to shift that to town because of the lack of volunteers to do that work, so, okay.
Yeah, so the second line, the 1,500, is associated with the parade.
Right, there's some
Right.
other items in there, but that's mostly parade expenses.
Okay,
And if you go on down, like the Historical Society grant,
yep,
that 10,000, which popped up a couple of years ago, the majority of that is related to the document retention work that they do.
right. and that helps them a lot, so. that's
Yeah.
good. Okay, what else?
Nothing really of note. We've got the harbor master in here too, and those, actually, the expenses for harbor master, that's on page 78. They've actually gone down.
Yeah, that's come down by 2,000,
By
basically. It's
$2,000.
exactly what Tom spent last year. They're basically kind of rolling over those office supplies and so forth this year.
And they did quite a bit of that in the budgeting, where they looked at historical actuals and historical averages and brought costs down where they've been overestimating the costs.
Okay. How has the discussion process with Kate gone in terms of covering this with her as opposed to reaching out to these department heads? Do you feel like you've had enough information and it's fine?
Like, I guess 99% of it's all inside Kate's head, so it's
Right.
easier to kind of go back to her and Jen's. But it's kind of been easier to just go back rather than kind of tracking down staff and trying to arrange a time.
easier.
And that's, I think also, like, if you looking back at the videos when we went through, we have,
Yeah, we watched the videos,
Yeah.
and those are so helpful, because you can go back and you can watch it 3 times if you didn't quite get it the first time. And they're actually extremely helpful.
yeah, we basically had like every dollar amount, every line item, there's a certain timestamp on the tape.
Timestamps are good.
Go back and run through it, so.
And we have to note that these particular budgets are fairly straightforward and
Right.
simple, so there was not,
There's not a lot of
Yeah,
controversy.
so the only
There's
thing
not
to
a lot of
watch for is if there's anything else on that one software upgrade. If the new service they decide to switch to happens to be more expensive or less
Right.
expensive, we'll just
Okay,
deal with that as we get closer. But that's really everything inside the community environment.
okay. Did you have a chance to collaborate with anybody on Jack's F&B team?
I have not.
We
but-
failed on that count, Jack, we apologize.
But we have reached out to
Okay.
talk to he and Bert on debt service and other stuff.
Okay. All right, terrific. So that does community environment. Any other budget topics that we're ready to discuss tonight? If not, that is okay. We've got our calendar here, and I want to populate that with topics from our assignment sheet so that we make sure for the next 3 meetings that we're going to have budget topics to cover. I'll propose, sorry.
Ready to go next week. You will be ready to
Okay, and your topics will be which ones?
go. Primarily DPW and police.
Okay, DPW and police for next week, that's terrific.
The action.
I am out the week of the 26th, or Tuesday the 26th, so I will not be here. Mr. McLaughlin, Senator McLaughlin is going to chair our meeting next week. That's not something you'll want to miss. And I mean that lovingly, you know that.
My God,
So
I don't know what I
for
did.
Tuesday, the 2nd of April, I'd like to cover all the protective services excluding police, and so that'll include fire and all the capital associated with that.
John, what were you doing now?
The week of the 2nd, or Tuesday, April
This is
2nd.
what I have.
Okay, got it.
Right,
So,
not the day, you guys will do the week
Nothing.
before when I'm not here. Okay, so we'll do fire, we'll do Board of Education, excess cost reimbursement, and all of the capital, proposed capital, we'll do that for April 3rd as well.
April 2nd?
I'm sorry, April 2nd,
April 2, yeah.
yeah.
So, I'm sorry,
And,
what did we move from the 26th?
well, the 26th is going to be Department of Public Works and Police.
Okay. And not Parks and Rec?
Well, then we can do Parks and Rec if
Well,
you.
yes, fine, we'll be ready to
Yeah.
do Parks and Rec too.
Okay,
Anything
terrific.
that's,
They're all under our.
yeah, anything under, we
Jamie
can,
and Rob, like, question, building control. I thought like a couple years ago, that was underneath our stuff,
It
but
should
that's
be.
now moved underneath. So we didn't do it, but it's underneath your, like, protective services.
Really?
But we should actually,
Or-
it should be moved
That's
for
okay.
next year under,
Yeah,
because
it
it's
sure should.
handled with
It
all
should.
Okay.
planning and zoning.
Agree completely.
So I would
Okay.
just move that next year. And we could go back and talk about that if we
Yeah.
need to. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll
Um,
pick that up. We'll go
I
ahead and pick
agree.
that up and we'll.
Yeah.
What other topics am I missing from the 26th, or maybe that was for today that we didn't cover?
Library, we're going to cover today, and actually, we have some,
Well, we haven't communicated to set up a call with
Exactly.
Alan. So one of the things we'll do right after this meeting, let's get that on the
let's get that on
calendar.
the calendar.
As opposed to having a sit-down meeting, which we've done in the past, we've kind of already met. So in the spirit of just simplification, I think we'll set up a call, and it should be pretty straightforward to get that done. And so what we could do, I'm out next week, but maybe we'll do library on the 2nd as well. That, I think, will be a quick discussion.
Yep.
And then for the 4th,
If they weren't so well prepared, it would be a quick discussion.
correct, that's exactly right. The other thing I wanted, Jim, when do you want to talk about some of the debt service and town debt? Is that when you want to
Well,
talk?
we just got the updated, we had the successful bond sale this morning.
Yeah, can you update everybody on that?
Yeah, well,
You-
So we had a successful bond sale.
That's terrific, that's a great update.
I was more than
Thank you.
happy to put James' name on it. Oh, no, sorry, put my name on. 9 bidders, I believe,
Yep.
so we were
Great.
happy with the number of bidders. I think, I'm looking at just the final report. So the average coupon, 294. Was that the yield?
Our
So-
total interest cost was 2.67.
Okay. So,
And the bids range from 2.67 up to around 2.9, I think.
yeah, so it's about a 20 basis point bid between the
Right.
winning bid and the losing bid, the losing bid.
And a new one?
So,
Roosevelt and Cross.
Roosevelt
Roosevelt
Cross,
Cross.
which is a kind of smaller retail-focused firm,
Rosie.
which is interesting. If you remember last time on the $12.5 million loan bond, Morgan Stanley Institutional came in for that. So it was just, I think just given the size of this.
they were hanging around the bid today also, so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Went well.
Okay, great.
And if you think about it relative to where the 10-year bond is at 2.6, we raised money at about 15 basis points inside of that, even though we're a little bit longer than 10 years. So
Great.
again, there's no principal in the first 2 years,
Right.
and they amortize in the final 18 years.
Great.
Well done.
Really, really good. Okay. What am I missing off our kind of master list for topics?
So
General government, library will move to the
So
3rd.
that's gonna, if you move that to the 2nd, then you're gonna have it
Or
with
second, sorry.
Board of Education and,
That's going to be straightforward.
Okay, perfect.
I've got a list of questions. I just need to get Paul and Frank to weigh in, but those will go to Tara in the next day or so. They're pretty straightforward. We've covered a lot of the topics for Board of Education already, but I'll have that out. And actually, I'll send a copy to you, Jack. It'll be interesting to see if you have other questions that I'm not thinking of, but we'll collaborate on that.
and
And
we'll,
then-
we'll talk about building control when we talk about human services, general,
Great.
miscellaneous, and other revenues.
Okay?
So we're taking building control from
Right.
you two.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I think these topics work as planned here. I will take this with these few revisions, type it onto our master calendar and send it around so that we'll have that. So I think that'll wrap up budget discussions for now, unless, Jack, you had any comments or anything from your end?
Just one note when you want to talk about it. The millage is proposed to, regarding the teacher's pension. That's moving out there in Hartford, and whether or not you want to have that conversation.
Yeah, we can
on
tee up the
second.
conversation. We'll talk about this multiple times. The question is, just more broadly, what do we do with the prospect of charges or expenses or costs imposed on the town at some point in the near future, based on some of the proposals that we're hearing about in Hartford? This is mainly around an assessment against the town for partial payment of our teacher pension liabilities. It's about $445,000 proposed for this year, and it goes up from there. I think 2 years after that, it's at $1.3 million or somewhere in that zip code. Again, I would stress that all these numbers are proposed numbers. These are not numbers that anybody's voted or that the governor signed into law. So one of the questions we got to deal with is whether there is some anticipatory planning we need to do to account for that. About the only thing you can think about doing is basically taxing to create a reserve, or taxing beyond what the town-generated expenditures are going to be in anticipation that we would have to pay that charge. I'd consider that. I think the difficulty is we just don't know whether that's going to happen. And so we're going to be asking taxpayers to pay a cost now for an expense that in fact is not, the nature of it has not been clarified. And so I'm a little reluctant to do that. Excuse me. I apologize for allergies today. The reality is that in terms of fund balance and even Board of Finance contingency, we have enough funding in both of those to take care of any of this sort of thing. So the notion that we, quote, don't have the money if that expenditure were to arise is not true. So the appropriated funds are available that we could pay for it. At the same time, thinking about whether we need to do some of that is something just worth considering. Does anybody have a point of view?
Yeah, I think the right approach is to push ourselves into some contingency so we're aware of what it might be based on the very, very best information we can get at the very last date. You know, this is no, we're not taking any risk here. It's just to do
Right.
the most practicable thing. Now,
Yep.
we get a signal that, and I happen to think it's happening, we get a signal that it's CCM or cost or somebody else can Terry. We get a signal that it's likely real. I think we'd have to just discuss what information we've been given and what we think about it.
Make the call at the last
And then
minute.
make that call.
Yep.
And actually, you know, I would err in favor of building it in. I just think it creates a separate event, that event with all the approvals that were required. By the way, there's another way to look at it. Maybe we want to put the attention on that as an item, so that it brings clarity why this adjustment is being made. I mean, that's another approach you could take.
Yeah.
But I offer that you would wait until the last possible date with the best information we have. And when would that be? When do we have to have the budget to the RTM?
Well, we're-
You have to vote,
By the 11th.
right.
Oh, my, wow.
Yeah, we're not going to have any clarity.
We're not
Is that
gonna
the
have a
deadline,
lot
or is that
of-
just when we're scheduled to vote?
You're scheduled to vote that week. I think the drop dead date is the following week because per charter, it has to get turned over to the town clerk in April. And we have to publish it in the paper the last week of April.
A notice requirement of 4 days, I think,
I
something.
think
Yeah.
so.
So, Jamie, is what you were saying, like, if that number is like 450, which I think would be, what, 20, it'd be 25% of the amount that our teacher salaries are above the state average, is that how?
That's the formula.
So we saw in the audit, like, they contributed $16.5 million, right, last year. That was that was the contribution on behalf of Darien, and it kind of flows through our cap audit.
Yeah.
So, and our teachers are, not administrators, I think 15% above average, I think.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's it. It's 15% over what you're over the average.
Right, it's
So if that
25%
number,
of
then
the
it's
normal
25% of
cost.
that day.
And
Yeah.
then you pay an additional for what you are over the statewide average. But I don't think anyone's shown how they're really applying that additional percent. I don't know if that means that you're paying 40% or if it's some other mathematical.
But just be clear, if the
Wizardry.
number is 16.6,
That's the full pension cost. That's taking care of unfunded liabilities, sins of the fathers kind of thing, and the normal cost. What
Yeah.
the proposal from the governor is 25% of the normal cost, which is in the current year, what liability is
Right.
accruing for current year salaries.
so not the deficit.
No,
No,
not,
current
Current
funding,
year.
currently
operating-
not making
Right.
us cover what should have been funded in the past.
Yeah,
And
so
what was that amount?
So it's 445 is the 25% of the normal cost. Then there's this talk of the additional for what each town pays above the state average.
So let's be clear about what this 25% is. The quote normal cost is what you have to pay in to support current employees, right?
Correct.
So this has nothing to do with retirees or
Correct.
any of that.
Correct.
Right.
So we're going to take the total cost to contribute to these pensions and OPEB or just pensions?
Just pension.
For just pensions, just current employees for the town of Darien.
Yeah.
And we're going to take that number and we're going to say 25% of that is $445,000.
No, because they're phasing it in over 3 years.
Okay.
It's $1.5 million.
So we're
Right.
going to
Which
get
is
to
why-
25%.
Right.
So we're much less than that right now. So the 15% kicker on top of that is because we pay our faculty or the people who are part of this
Above
union
the
contract above the average for
Right.
Yeah, but it-
some defined
And it's
average.
15% on the 25, it's 15% on the 445 or it's 15% on the total?
I don't know.
I thought, yeah.
That's what's not clear,
The
but-
1.5,
Right.
that's our
That
portion.
1.5 is 25% of the normal
Of the
cost.
normal costs. But doesn't that also include a component for the portion that's the 15% above the average?
I have only heard that was the 25% number.
Okay.
So
Because that's what the governor released, was the 25%. And then I think the 15% came on as an additional idea.
So Jen, just to be clear, the numbers that we talked about, the 445, the 900, the 1,000,003,
That's the
is
governor's
coming from the
proposal.
governor. It's not homegrown,
Correct.
lack of a better word. You and Kate haven't, calculated it.
Right, the only thing that we have in writing as a firm proposal is the 445 proposed by the governor.
Okay.
If I might get in
Please.
here. First of all, we keep on talking that this is teachers' pension. Jamie was kind enough to pass along the list, and I did some analysis on it. I know, Jim, you raised a question on this in one of the last meetings. Out of our 8 towns in our DERG, we are the 7th lowest percentage. And while there has been some discussion that it's only good schools that pay over this, Stanford's excess over the average is 25%, much greater than ours on that.
Against the same average, really?
Yep, that 25% over. And you have to understand, part of this has to do with the longevity of your teaching staff. So they're up there, as well as the size of your school system and what flexibility we have. But I have an analysis that I was doing that summarizes that, the number of schools, based upon what somebody's ranking, and I also looked at Farmingdale, Guilford, a couple other good schools. Farmington, rather. And some of the other local cities around Norwalk, Stanford, and Greenwich that are outside of our DERG. And I can do that because mill rates also switch on this as well. But the teacher's pension isn't just teachers. It's certified staff. So certified staff includes anyone in an educational environment that is certified. So the school psychologist, the school social worker,
The nurse.
and several of the other, those type of individuals that have a teaching or educational certification are included in that pension number. We haven't, in conversations with Tara, we haven't been able to truly figure out the number. F&B did have a conversation on this, and we're sort of in between 2 places. The consensus was we are not for any budgetary control this year, because we just don't know what it is. Number 2, we believe it belongs in the Board of Ed budget and not the town side, because it's relating to their employees, and they ultimately will be controlling it. But I don't think anybody's in the position to add, using rough numbers, $500,000 to the Board of Ed budget as an appropriation in this particular year. I think and based upon conversations that I had with John previously, I think the committee felt very strongly that you can perhaps, quote unquote, earmark but not reserve part of the general fund, because at $400,000, this is something that the town probably can afford. We'd also like to make sure that it gets highlighted to our taxpayers, which would then require the appropriation of this board and the RTM to draw those funds down. And so there was a lot of reasons not to do anything this year, plus the one that's the biggest concern is the $4.6 million on car tax, personal property. And the board has, if I'm not mistaken, has stated that a supplemental tax might well be the solution for that. And if that's the solution and we get hit with both of these, then you can roll them up into one supplemental
And deal
tax.
with them, but deal with them separate
Right,
from this
so-
process.
Understanding that it may be happening and keeping track, but, 500,000 we can handle at this time, and then start requiring it to be in the Board of Ed side of the budget, because that's whose employees it is.
So just to be clear, you're saying if it's an actual, it passes, and it's actually something we need to document and we need to pay it, you're saying it should be on the Board of Ed side?
Yep.
Okay, but if we're thinking about reserving it, whether or not we
Shouldn't be-
reserve it somewhere, or just take, if it's a small number, take it out of the general
I
fund?
think
You're not proposing a reserve or extra
No,
budget control?
we're
for the
not.
Board of
We're
Ed?
saying be aware of it, when you're doing at the end of the year, you're doing your, how do we pay for things, looking at the general fund balance. Remember some of the previously committed funds will, and Jen will correct me because I use the wrong term all the time, will now be unassigned. Is that the right word?
It is.
So that will more than cover some extra funds that we have in there. And then we can highlight it and start to move it in as part of the Board of Ed budgeting process in the next year. If in fact it occurs by June. And on any of these things, we know that the Hartford doesn't move that quickly.
Hey, Jack, do we have any idea what the cost is for Stanford in this first year?
Off the top, I'm good with numbers. Off the top of my head, I cannot, but I do have their number. And I wanted to just finish up, but then I'll submit what I did to John, to Tara, to Jamie, and to my committee, and to Clara on the Board of Ed side. So it has all the numbers. I've been sitting there picking some things out, and looking, especially at the number of schools that they have, because that also, if administrators are also included in that pension, which they may or may not be, I mean, obviously, even in the Board of Ed side, when we looked at, we have 7 schools, and compare it to, let's say, Weston that has 3, we're gonna have more administrators.
Right.
So,
Thanks.
but yes, I'll get you that information.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, good. Nothing else, so just to recap where we are, we've done human environment. I'm going to send out a revised workshop schedule, so we'll cover the rest of these topics. We're going to talk to Alan about setting up a library call, so we'll be hopefully ready to discuss that on the 2nd, if that day works for you, Alan. Great. So we'll cover that there, and we'll keep marching along. Any questions or further comments on budget matters?
The only thing I would say is on Saturday, they had the school tour.
Oh, right, I had to miss that. How did that go? Any
All the
comments?
schools, and I thought it was helpful. There's not a lot of big projects, and were you on that? Were you there? And I feel like the majority of their projects kind of fall into either ventilation-related
Right.
topics, and that's not only like the level 1s and level 2s for this year, but looking out in the future years, or it falls into kind of lighting. There's a lot of kind of parking lot lighting and so forth going on, and so one of the things I thought would be helpful for this board is as we think about like future capital needs, I think it'd be helpful, as they have their grid for each school this year, level 1, 2, 3, and going out in the future, if they could somehow allocate these projects, like how many projects do we have related to, like, generally ventilation?
Right.
And how many do we have related to kind of redoing all the, because the numbers, some of them are placeholders, but I think it'd be good to see, get some overall classification of where all these expenses, like what categories they fall into.
Right by type almost.
Yeah, because there's so many different ventilation projects that are going on.
You'd hope that Mike has them all coordinated.
Well, correct, well, does it make sense that, I think,
Right.
they're
Or
looking
in
at,
terms of bonding, or you're thinking in terms of?
just in terms of making sure, like, I think they're moving,
It's more efficiency, right?
I might be mistaken on this, but I think they're moving like everything out of Henley. There's no summer activities. They're doing a lot more work at Henley this summer to try to consolidate and get more done. But I think what Mike said was some of the issues were in terms of dealing with all the ventilation issues at Henley is that he would have a hard time finding contractors who could handle such a large job in what's basically 60 days.
Okay.
And I think the other thing that was discussed is, whether or not these school grants, construction grants, are going to continue forward, and whether or not we're going to be able to apply for them. Does it make sense, if they have a level 2 that's set for next year, even if it's an all-cycle request, let's not wait and just
Right.
not put it in the budget when we can bond at 2.6%. If we can get a 27% reimbursement from the state of the grant today, let's do the darn thing today, submit the grant, get it in, bond it, and
Well, I know at the last Oxbridge Building Committee meeting, they had a gentleman there who specializes in writing these grants. I don't know if you were at that meeting, Jennifer, but he showed up, and that is one of the services he provides, which is helping towns like ours or building communities like ours get really sharp on that to make sure we do exactly what you're talking about, which is to take advantage of that. So the building committee's on top of that in a serious way.
And Paul was at the tour on Saturday, and he pointed it out to Mike and I think to Tara that I think both New Canaan and Norwalk had hired these grant consultants.
Same thing, yeah, that's great, okay.
Well, to add to that, we actually, on all of our major building projects, do have a consultant that comes in. We do not have a single person that does it, but it does come on. And the 3 grants that Mike talked about was the building committee. If we're doing it on a town property like 35 Leroy, the amount is 10%. And for the security, it's based upon need by putting in a grant. And we have received some grants on some of our security issues.
Great, okay. All right, anything else on budget matters? Okay, thank you. Financial report.
Really nothing exciting, which is good. Property taxes are doing very well. We're at 99.67%, and because we changed the way that we budget for those, that is really a true number. So our collections are very good this year.
Great,
And then on the expenditure side, I don't see anything to cause concern. State revenues on page 6, you can see educational cost sharing. We've gotten half of the adopted state budget. We budgeted 0. We've gotten in over 200,000. The last half of that will be coming in later in the spring. I think it's the beginning of May that we get the second half on that. And on LoCIP, those allocations become available in March, so I will be going out to the state website, pulling down their application and submitting for reimbursement for our paving projects. That's what we use LoCIP for. So
Okay.
once we receive that, you'll see a number in the received column.
do we have an updated schedule from the state as to what they're forecasting for us for those grants for the next fiscal year?
We do.
All right, is that incorporated in your latest spreadsheet, or do we need to do that?
Let
Well,
me
we'll
take a
do
look at
grants in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we don't miss that.
Then on the capital pages 10 and 11, with our bond issue today, we are cleaning up the deficit in the DPW garage, the high school cafeteria, Fox Lane, the town hall generator, and the baseball field and homeschool skylight are also included in this bond
So to
issue.
be clear, that's all the cash deficits, so we clear that up.
Correct.
Okay. I think that's great. I love the schedule because it just keeps us on the ball for stuff like that, to make sure that those expenditures that are reasonably bondable are not left out, like
Right.
we've had trouble with in the past. That's terrific. Anything else on this? Jim?
I just have a question on the property taxes. You know, when we look at collected versus our budget, is there a report that shows how much of the remaining, how much of that 448 is just a mathematical difference between what we collected and what we assumed versus how much
Truly
is actually
outstanding.
outstanding, like how much is truly unpaid?
Yeah,
that
because
is
the
due?
budget number is different than what the actual
Yeah.
levy is.
Great.
How much?
I can have that for you for next
Yeah, that's a great question.
report.
Yeah, so we know what we actually should be thinking might still be coming in.
And is it related to anything specific?
Well, but keep in mind in terms of what we budgeted, by definition, we went out and we had 2 numbers. We knew what the grand list was going to be. And we adopted a mill rate, and that raises X dollars in taxes. So in the sense of what we're supposed to have collected, it should have been that dollar amount that we approved as part of the budget that the RTM voted on. So if we go back, any difference should be driven by changes in the grand list or people not paying their taxes. So there's kind of 2 components, I think, on that. It'd be interesting to know sort of where we stand now, what the sources of difference were, whether it was a change in the grand list, or to Jim's point, what I think you were getting at, what's the dollar amount of taxes that people just have not paid? Because then that feeds into, at least in part, this balance of uncollected taxes we have every year that they, when does that get cleaned up? I forget. Kathy comes in with a list.
With the
where-
suspense list, I think she does it every
Yeah, so anyway,
Remind me, did we budget 100% collection?
no,
No.
with 98.6.
We were at 98.9, and then we changed our methodology, so now we're at 99.3
Right.
for the 18-19 budget year.
So we budgeted at 99%.
Right.
Because remember, what we were doing before is we budget a low collection rate.
Right, and then we
The
had that.
taxes collected were always higher, but we always budgeted some contribution for fund balance in there. And I said, so why bother doing that? Why don't you actually budget what we're anticipated to collect? with a kind of cushion, like,
Right.
which I think you defined as maybe half a percentage point or
25 basis.
25 basis points, that's right. And just build that into there and just leave fund balance alone. So
Right.
that's a philosophical change in terms of how we did this for a long time, but I
Mm-hmm.
think more efficient, so.
Well, there was another little change in there too, wasn't there? Because we just assumed a lower collection rate on sort of the full grant list versus the small adjustments that get made. You know, aren't there a handful of adjustments that get made to certain properties?
Yeah, there's definitely grand list adjustments throughout the year.
Correct. And I think that was your 25 basis points, which was to account for those kind of
Right.
changes.
Yeah.
I think that's right, Jim.
Then just a question, because we're talking about building permits and planning, zoning revenue and so forth. It said the budget included 750 grand for these, the 3 or 4 developments. I noticed that we're tracking at like half of what we should be. How much of that 750 has actually come in?
None. And depending on the timing right now, the latest that I heard is that some demolition could start June, July, so I'm not expecting to see much.
This is for
In the-
Stop and Shop, right?
No, I thought that, it was gonna be the gas station,
Is this the road, huh?
On Corbin Drive?
Corbin,
Oh,
thank you.
Corbin Baywater.
Yeah, I thought that the first thing was gonna be the gas station there. But out of the 3 of them, whatever is starting first is like a June, July anticipated, so I don't think we're going to see much, if any, on the building
Okay.
permits.
Any other questions or points on the financial report?
Jen, just a quick question on the cafeteria on page 10.
Mhm.
So our expenditures are about $1.8 million, so are we running 151,000 positive? And if so, are we expecting any more expenses to come through?
Yes, there are invoices that are unpaid, I don't think they've released retainage yet.
Okay.
I think there's a few straggler items here and there, so most all of that is gonna be spent, I
Spent.
think.
They'll
Some
probably-
of it will be
I think
there'll be a
they'll
little bit
probably-
less, but,
I'm guessing like around 10 or 12 will come back. There's a couple pieces of molding they're waiting for.
How did it come out? I know you took a,
Looks good.
How does it look?
It looks great. I mean, it's really neat. When we were there for the tour, they had like the nano doors open, and it's sort of a nice, it's a great look. They installed, somebody contributed, I don't know who it was, but I think somebody donated a sound system on the side so the kids can like hook up their iPad and just play music throughout the cafeteria.
That's great. So, well,
And
it's a great
Spotify, I
project.
mean, it's a nice
DJ
cafeteria.
DJ for the day?
If I could add to that, John, remember
Please.
when we took that first tour? And when you walked into the cafeteria, if anybody was talking ahead of you, you heard their conversation and conversations that occurred 2 days ago that was still echoing around. When you walked in there, there was a certain calm that wasn't there during the first tour. So
Terrific.
just that whole sound system had a significant, several of us had made comment when we walked in saying, oh my goodness, what a difference.
And the principal pointed out that kids come down there all throughout the day and actually study and use it all the time, and that she's using it, they can use it for staff meetings, because you can actually have a meeting here and not have it echo over there, so I think they've been pretty happy.
Note for the Oxbridge Building Committee on cafeteria design. We will take that. Well, seriously, right, I've said it 1,000 times, I've said it 1,000,000, we do not want to spend money rebuilding or fixing brand-new buildings.
If I could just share one thing, you know, when we were walking through the Tokenique School, which is now 7 years old, 6 years old,
Newer than the high school, but yeah, something like that.
so we're now, there's 30,000 or so that we're replacing the gym floor. Because apparently there was a sort of single surface, single piece of gym flooring. It's like, it looks almost like a piece of concrete, whatever, that was put in the middle. And, you know, Mike Lynch said the floor was way too big. It was right over top of an expansion joint, and what everybody expected happened after 2 years is it just cracked. So now we're ripping up that entire floor.
Brand
and
new
putting-
school.
Brand new school, and putting down a traditional wooden floor, which is kind of what should have happened when we first did it. And it seems like there was some small savings that went after kind of create this kind of monolithic floor. okay, rather than a traditional gym floor. And now we're paying 6 years later to rip the whole thing out and put down a traditional floor. And I think that there's gotta be a way we make sure we have the right people on these building committees where we're not like chasing $2,000 of savings to manufacture some overall number and stuff just coming back to bite us later.
Well, they've made a huge mistake on the building committee because I'm on it. That aside, one of the mantras for this committee is to go ahead and spend the money now. In other words, value engineering this stuff and not building these floors correctly, to use your example, or any one of 50, 100,000 other things in these school design and build projects. We just can't have that. And I don't want to spend profligately on the new school, but at the same time, I want every design decision made consistent with this notion of saying, are we sure that that we've spent the right amount of money on this so that we don't have to rip up the gym floor 3 years later?
Yeah, we've got to stop working backwards into these numbers, and it's like the knowledge is there, and when you walk through the building and you listen to Mike Lynch talk about all of this, I mean,
He knows what he's doing.
yeah.
And remember, the key change with this project is going to be that we're not estimating the cost. So you don't have to come out with some number and, oh my God, it's now bid up to this higher number, we got to pare it back to the original number. I think that actually drove some of the decision-making in Tokenique and certainly the high school. We're not going to have that this time. We're going to start with an end game in mind that says this is how we're going to design and set up this building with all the best thinking. We're not cutting corners, we're not going to gold plate it, but it's going to be functional, and we're not going to have any of that the kind of value engineering that I think plagued those other projects. Then we're going to get somebody to estimate the cost, and it's that number that we're going to talk about. And so what we should be doing is holding ourselves to meeting that number as part of the construction process, as opposed to value engineering a number that was too high to begin with. So, okay. Anything else on financial report? Approval of minutes. So I know I looked at the attendee list. We've got the right attendees tonight to approve both of these minutes. The January 15th one, do these include all the edits that I sent?
You know, I
They
think
include
there's,
what you sent, what Jim sent.
so I
Did you
think,
send edits?
I did. And
Okay, I think I missed those.
Okay, and I think Jamie had
He
some,
sent the some this morning.
okay, good, so you got those?
Yep.
So Jamie, did you review those?
Did you get them?
No, I got them, they're not reflected.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, they're not in here, and, my name is still misspelled. Yeah, so
Okay.
my edits were, I think you got most of the edits, but I didn't see Jamie's.
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to table the January 15th minutes, and if we'll
We'll
do
take one more shot at it.
one more shot at it.
Okay, perfect.
fine.
And then
Okay.
I did have some edits on the next ones as well.
February 19th?
Yes.
All right.
Just a couple of little typos, but I just was gonna just pass to you. But I think, on page 2, second paragraph, the donation as well to appropriate into a Parks and Recs special revenue fund. And I can just give these to you if you want to.
Okay.
And then there was a couple of just little punctuation edits in the paragraph that begins Mr. Zagrodsky on page 2. And then a couple of, there's an edit, number 6, review idle capital projects. These projects didn't have any activity in the last 18 months, but I think you need to remove "she," but there is a plan for them. And then there's another little edit in that line too, but nothing at all controversial. And on page 5, we're missing a "the" in the second paragraph and a couple little typos in the first.
What I would do on all these minutes, so before we include any minutes in the package, Jennifer should have an email from you that
Yes,
says
we
we're done.
usually are good about that, but
Yeah.
we've had some little,
Back and forth.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so we
All
just,
right. So you feel like we can vote these
I
tonight
think
with your
you could
edits?
vote these okay with the edits, because the edits are really minor.
Okay.
Or we can table them, whatever you prefer.
Oh, let's do it, but since we got it. and
Yeah,
we'll
I
come
think
back
we
and
could
do
just
the
approve.
ones for January later.
Yep, perfect.
All right, motion to approve the February 19th minutes as edited by Diana, Rob, and yeah, Jim can't vote, so I'll put down Jamie. So Rob first, Moved it, Jamie seconded, all in favor? Okay, so 4-0-1 with Jim abstaining. And we'll table the January 15th minutes. Okay, special assignments, committee reports. Audit committee, anything there?
Nothing.
Okay, other committees? Just on the Oxbridge Building Committee, they had a special tour of the Tokenique School and the Oxbridge School. I think the Tokenique tour is, I forget which one's actually on video. Anyway, one of the tours is on video. Apparently that tour went pretty well and it was comprehensive, so they got a chance to both see the new school and see what the pluses and minuses were of that, as well as an up-close look at some of the problems with Oxbridge, which of course just further confirms the need that we need to make a change in that building. So that continues to progress. They have not set the next date for the meeting of that building committee yet. I checked with Kip the other day and they don't have it. But we're moving along pretty quickly with selection of an architecture firm and a few other things that need to go through a bidding process right now. One of the things I made at the meeting before last, or a point I made at the meeting before last, was whether we needed to make Board of Finance contingency funds available if we've got to get something paid for before, or that's inconsistent with the timing of the next RTM meeting. But Jack is aware of all this, and we're going to be in tight communication with them to let them know what's going on so that there's not any miscommunication over that. I don't anticipate that we would have to do that, but if there's something we need to do to keep these early set of activities moving forward, we'll definitely recommend that. So more to come on that, but in any case, if we have to do that, that obviously would come to this board for a discussion and a vote.
On the Pear Tree
Yes.
Beach Building Committee, we're moving forward, we're progressing on the discussions to select an architect.
Okay.
We have a meeting tomorrow night, and I suspect that we'll make a final decision
Okay.
at that meeting.
All right. Chairman's report, something we could discuss tonight, and we've passed this around. So Lori Dunn, who heads up Human Resources for the town, at Jennifer's request, she updated this survey of chief elected official salaries across like towns in our area. So the purpose of this is for us to consider the compensation for the first selectman. This is irrespective of who holds that job. We need to do it around this time every year so that any change that we make in the first selectman's compensation is reflected in the first paycheck of the new first selectman who's elected in November. So this will not go into effect for the incumbents' compensation before the election, but will take place after that election. So as you can see here, Darien is really just right in the middle at $130,000 a year for first selectman. We do not have a vehicle lease payment or a special stipend to cover the cost of a vehicle, but you'll see there under mileage reimbursement it says yes. So when the first selectman does travel with a personal vehicle, we do reimburse mileage for those trips. You can also see where we are in terms of pensions, defined contribution, all of that. Again, kind of all in, you can see that we're right in the middle of this particular selection. I'd note that we're one of 4 towns that has a town manager who's compensated. That would be Kate Bush on the schedule that you see here. And what we need to do is make a decision about what, if any, change we'd like to make to the first selectman's salary. I'd remind you that the last time we considered this 2 years ago, we had bumped it from 115 to 130, and that was in recognition that, at least our perception at the time, that the first selectman was undercompensated relative to peers. Now that we're sort of sitting in the middle of that distribution, I don't know that we need to get pretty aggressive on this. Jennifer and I discussed a change of 130 to 135,000. So you can see it still actually keeps it right in the middle, because that'd be $41 less than what Richfield makes. So not a significant move in terms of where our salary as it relates to these other towns, but a modest increase in any case. And as a reminder, once we vote this will go into effect in November, and it's good for 2 years. Any comments or questions?
Do we know if any of these other towns are having discussions about or as part of their budget process they're putting in increases?
They're probably discussing them, because if they're on the same election cycle as our first selectman, because they're gonna be setting it, coming up to the election, but where their discussions are on it, I don't know.
And in terms of Jamie's work on like West Cog, that's not a compensated, is there any compensation on that?
We do not have to decide this at this meeting. The one things I would recommend, I just want to make sure you have this in your hands, that you could have a chance to think about it. We just need to approve it in the next while or so that it's
I'll comment.
approved and in place well in
John,
advance of the
I'll
election.
make a comment. I'm not sure how I got the lead on this thing 4 years ago, but we were, just so there's some history here for the group at large, or the public at large. And this is from recall, so I may be off, but we were dramatically low. For whatever reasons, historically, I think we might have been at 85,000. We made the move, which on an absolute dollar and percentage basis was dramatic,
Right.
to bring Darien into some level of parity with the sort of bottom third. We made the other jump, again, both jumps, one considerable, the first one on a percentage and absolute dollar basis, and then the next one, again, seemingly fairly large. But I think we brought this in 2 steps into where it belongs.
Yeah.
So I think the $5,000 number, I can't do the percentage in my head, but it sounds like it's around 4.2% or something like that. Seems about right. The other thing, so I'm fine with that. I think we could act on that this evening. I don't know why we delay. This is a terrific analysis. I helped create the spreadsheet. Lori's brought it up to date. Thank you, Lori. 2 items, though, that raise a question for me, just because it's on a compare and contrast basis. We have, and again, I want to make sure we're competitive. There's only one town, Fairfield, that provides pension, and we do too. Interesting. A nice perk was it. Then that's a defined benefit. On the DC side, of course, we then alternatively are no. We don't provide a defined contribution plan, where there's effects to both. One is a defined benefit contribution. I don't know what the to dollarize those 2 things would be interesting. I'm not sure how we got there.
Right.
But just be mindful that we do provide some retirement deferred compensation in the plan. We just are choosing to be out of round with the peer group by doing it other than Fairfield as a DB, their defined benefit.
How long does the first selectman need to be in office to qualify for a pension?
I think they're 5-year vesting, like all.
5 years, okay.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
So I think we're in a good place. I just wanted to bring that pension item up. I think that's appropriate. That's what we've chosen to do. There's a moral hazard, essentially, if you don't put yourself in a place to get yourself at least in parity. I mean,
Right.
you're going to get a certain demographic of people that could afford to do it at all. And I think we want to be at least commensurate with our peer group. But I think literally for Darien, we want to pay the person appropriately.
Right.
I'm okay with it.
So I have a question about, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I had a question about, when we say we're in the middle, if we're looking at total comp, you're just looking at actual salary? Because if you look at
I'm
total.
looking actually literally in the middle of the page.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
okay. But I mean, in terms of total compensation, we're, in the bottom.
We're,
Third, right? We're-
$34,000 shy of the top figure, which is, I guess, Ridgefield at $164,000, which includes some other benefits here that I don't
Yeah,
fully
John.
understand, so.
Point of information again, this is, Diane, you're asking the right questions, but I think we really do want to isolate on whether or not there's a town manager. And that aspect of
Yeah, because that
both
does change.
oversight and direct duties and responsibilities is a contributor.
Right.
So isolating on those other 3 instances, which are Weston, Greenwich, and New Canaan, is really a better peer group. And so for me, I'd anchor against those. And obviously New Canaan is probably quite a direct peer. And you want to combine those 2 things. And, I think we're a little low. I think we're a little low.
Yeah, by comparison,
A
you've
little
got,
low, too.
you've got New Canaan, which has a town manager. They have no mileage reimbursement or anything for a vehicle, so maybe that's $7,000 or $8,000 haircut there. In any case, their total comp for New Canaan is $157,000.
Yeah.
And take out the car allowance to equalize it with what we have, call it $150. It's still $20,000 more than what the first selectman gets at Darien.
I feel like the other piece that's a little bit missing, one, how many employees? Because we do have we have 21,000 people inside 19 square miles, but we should look at how many employees they have to actually oversee.
No, actually, that's a good, I mean, I do a little bit, this is not directly what I do. I do some comp work in my industry. We call that span of control. You go to look for FTEs, the full-time equivalents that would be available. And I think that would be, I don't want to have Lori go back and have to dig all this stuff out, but it's easily found out, it's discoverable easily. That's a very relevant comment, Jim.
Yeah, because I think that plays in with the town manager. So like how many
Yeah.
employees do you and you and the town manager have? And the other thing that just looked a little bit off was on the healthcare, the employee cost share. So it's 8%, which,
Yeah.
is second from the bottom, or third from the bottom.
Right. Tell you what, we brought this early because there's no urgency to get this done. We just need to get it done in a timely manner. So what I'd like to do is table this. I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention, and let's consider it at the next meeting. But give this some thought, really stare at these numbers, and let's make sure that our first selectman, whoever that person is in the future, is compensated fairly and competitively.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, that was all I had for the chairman's report, other than to summarize kind of where we are. I will get out a revised calendar and move around some of these assignments. We'll connect with Alan on a library discussion, and we will keep moving this along. Does anybody have any other questions or anything you'd like to add this evening? Okay. Jennifer, anything else from you?
Nope.
All right, I think we are done. Motion to adjourn, please. Diana, second. Jen, all in favor?